What if I told you a teenage mechanic from Iowa discovered something Chevrolet's best engineers completely missed? A way to make their smallest V8 match the output of their biggest, baddest muscle car engine for less than the cost of a tank of gas today. And picture this. It's 1962 in small-town Iowa. Drag strips are ruled by big block thunder. The Chevy 409 is king, immortalized in song, worshipped by speed freaks everywhere. Then a 17-year-old kid named Don Nicholson rolls up to the starting line in a lightweight Chevy 2. Under the hood, a junkyard 283 small block that cost him $65 total. The big block guys are laughing. They stop laughing when the Christmas tree goes green. This is the story of how a teenager with $35 and a revolutionary idea embarrassed General Motors, rewrote the rules of hot rodding, and accidentally discovered the future of performance engines 20 years before anyone else figured it out. To understand just how insane Don Nicholson's achievement was, we need to talk about the automotive landscape of 1962. This was the dawn of the muscle car era, though nobody called it that yet. The formula was simple and brutal. Bigger displacement meant more power. Period. You wanted to go fast? You bought cubic inches, and Chevrolet's 409 cubic inch V8 was the ultimate expression of this philosophy. Introduced in 1961, this monster displaced nearly 7 liters. The top Super Sport version cranked out 409 horsepower, 1 per cubic inch, which was the holy grail of naturally aspirated performance. It featured a unique W-shaped combustion chamber design, forged aluminum pistons, solid lifters, and dual 4-barrel carburetors. The compression ratio hit 11.25:1, demanding premium fuel that cost extra at every fill-up. An engine, the 409, wasn't just an engine, it was a statement. It was expensive, exclusive, and absolutely dominated drag strips across America. The Beach Boys literally wrote a song about it. She's real fine, my 409. When you pulled up to a stoplight in a 409-powered Impala, other drivers knew exactly what they were looking at. 409 cubic inches of American thunder. And meanwhile, the 283 small block was Chevrolet's workhorse engine. Introduced in 1957, it powered everything from pickup trucks to Corvettes. It was reliable, cheap to build, and relatively efficient. But powerful? Not really. The hottest factory 283 was the fuel-injected version in the Corvette, rated at 315 horsepower. Most 283s made far less, around 195 horsepower with a 2-barrel carburetor, maybe 230 with a 4-barrel. The engineering philosophy behind these two engines couldn't have been more different. The 409 was a purpose-built performance engine designed from the ground up to make maximum power. It featured massive ports, huge valves, and strengthened components throughout. The heads alone weighed nearly twice what small block heads did. Everything about it screamed performance. And then the 283, on the other hand, was designed for versatility. It had to fit in compact engine bays, deliver decent fuel economy, and survive hundreds of thousands of miles of daily driving. The bore was 3.875 inches, the stroke just 3.0 inches. This over-square design let it rev freely, but the small displacement meant it would never make big power. At least, that's what everyone believed. Here's where young Don Nicholson enters the picture. At 17 years old, he was already a gifted mechanic working at a local shop in Iowa. But unlike most hot rodders of his generation, Nicholson wasn't obsessed with cubic inches. He was obsessed with efficiency. He looked at engines differently, seeing potential where others saw limitations. Nicholson had been studying fuel injection systems, particularly the Rochester mechanical fuel injection that Chevrolet offered on Corvettes. While everyone else was bolting on bigger carburetors, he was fascinated by fuel injection's ability to deliver precisely metered fuel at exactly the right moment. Carburetors relied on vacuum and velocity to draw fuel through jets. Fuel injection forced fuel into the intake stream under pressure. The difference was revolutionary, but almost nobody in drag racing was paying attention. And why? Because fuel injection was complicated, temperamental, and expensive. A new Rochester fuel injection unit cost over $500 in 1962, more than many complete engines. Most hot rodders considered it a gimmick, something for rich Corvette owners who wanted to impress at the country club. Drag racers stuck with what they knew, multiple carburetors, preferably really big ones. But Nicholson saw something everyone else missed. Fuel injection didn't just deliver fuel more precisely. It completely eliminated the restriction that carburetors created in the intake tract. A carburetor, even a big 4-barrel, was essentially a controlled restriction. Air had to flow through the venturi to create the pressure drop that drew fuel through the jets. This restriction limited how much air the engine could inhale, which limited how much power it could make. NN fuel injection had no such restriction. The intake was just a straight shot into the engine. Air flowed freely, unimpeded. The injectors sprayed fuel directly into the ports. This meant an engine could breathe far better than anyone realized. And better breathing meant more power. Potentially a lot more power. NH10. So Nicholson went hunting, not for a complete engine, but for parts. He found a 283 block at a junkyard, pulled from a wrecked 1960 Chevrolet. $35. The block was good, just needed a cleanup. Then he located a used Rochester fuel injection unit from a crashed 1962 Corvette. The owner wanted $50. Nicholson talked him down to $30. $65 total for the foundation of his experiment. Now came the real work. Nicholson completely disassembled the 283, checking every measurement, every clearance. The block got bored 30 thousandths over, bringing displacement to 287 cubic inches, still tiny compared to the 409. He sourced forged pistons from a speed shop's clearance bin, getting them for half price because they were last year's stock. The compression ratio was critical. Nicholson knew that higher compression extracted more energy from each combustion event, but too high, and the engine would detonate, destroying itself in seconds. The 409 ran 11.25.1 compression on premium fuel. Nicholson decided to go slightly lower, 11-1, to provide a small safety margin. He achieved this by milling the heads and using pop-up pistons that protruded slightly above the deck at top dead center. The camshaft selection was where Nicholson really showed his understanding of engine dynamics. While everyone else was running massive duration cams that made power at high RPM but killed low-end torque, he chose what would later be called a H-cheater profile. The cam had relatively moderate duration, 282 degrees on the intake, 290 on the exhaust, but extreme lift, nearly half an inch of valve lift, which was radical for the era. And this cam profile did something brilliant. It opened the valves quickly and held them at maximum lift for as long as possible, then snapped them shut. This maximized airflow while maintaining good cylinder pressure. The engine would make power everywhere, from idle to redline, but it required perfect valve train geometry and springs capable of controlling the aggressive cam profile. Nicholson spent weeks on the cylinder heads. Using hand tools and patience, he carefully enlarged the ports, matching them perfectly to the intake manifold. He didn't make them huge. That would have killed velocity. Instead, he made them the perfect size to maintain high airspeed while flowing enough volume for high RPM operation. He polished the exhaust ports to a mirror finish, but left the intakes slightly rough to promote fuel atomization. Antoine. The valve train got similar attention. Nicholson used Corvette solid lifters, chrome moly push rods, and roller tip rocker arms he fabricated himself. The valve springs were the stiffest units available, capable of controlling the valves at engine speeds that would float stock springs into oblivion. He degreed the cam perfectly, ensuring optimal valve timing, but the real magic was in the fuel injection tuning. The Rochester system used a complicated arrangement of mechanical linkages and vacuum signals to determine fuel delivery. Most people who tried to modify them ended up with engines that wouldn't idle, stumbled on acceleration, or ran so rich they washed the oil off the cylinder walls. Nicholson approached it methodically. He built a flow bench from a vacuum cleaner and plywood, measuring exactly how much air flowed through the system at different throttle positions. He modified the fuel metering cam, essentially reprogramming the mechanical computer that controlled fuel delivery. Hours were spent on the dyno at the local speed shop, adjusting, testing, adjusting again. The breakthrough came when he realized the stock fuel injection was calibrated for a Corvette, a heavy car that needed smooth street manners. His Chevy 2 weighed 1,500 pounds less. It didn't need low-end torque for cruise control, it needed violence. He recalibrated everything for wide-open throttle performance, accepting a lumpy idle and temperamental street manners in exchange for maximum power. And when he finally fired up the completed engine, the sound was unlike any 283 anyone had heard. It didn't have the lazy lope of a big block. It crackled and snarled, the solid lifters creating a mechanical symphony that rose to a shriek as the tachometer climbed. The engine pulled hard from 3,000 RPM and kept pulling all the way to 7,500 RPM, a speed that would scatter most big blocks into shrapnel. The shop's dyno, the numbers were staggering. 350 horsepower at 7,000 RPM, 320 pound-feet of torque at 5,200 RPM, from 287 cubic inches. That worked out to 1.24 horsepower per cubic inch. Better than the vaunted 409, better than anything Chevrolet offered from the factory. Let that sink in for a moment. A 17-year-old kid with $65 in parts had just matched the output of Chevrolet's most expensive, most powerful production engine. The 409 made its 409 horsepower from 409 cubic inches, 1.0 horsepower per cube. Nicholson's 283 was making 24% more power per cubic inch. It was like a welterweight boxer hitting as hard as a heavyweight. The power delivery was completely different too. The 409 made its power through brute displacement, each combustion event moving a massive amount of air and fuel. It hit hard, but peaked at 6,000 RPM. Nicholson's 283 made its power through RPM and efficiency. It revved nearly 2,000 RPM higher than the 409, making up for its smaller displacement with more combustion events per minute. But horsepower numbers on a dyno don't win races. Nicholson needed to prove his creation on the track. He dropped the engine into a 1962 Chevy 2 Nova, a compact car that Chevrolet marketed as economical transportation. The car was plain, almost homely, with skinny tires and a basic interior. Nobody expected it to be fast. The first test came at Cordova Dragway in Illinois. Nicholson had driven 2 hours to avoid racing at his local track where everyone knew him. He wanted honest reactions. He tech inspected without fanfare, telling officials it was just a 283 with fuel injection. They classified him in B stock, a relatively slow class for mildly modified small blocks. And his first pass was conservative, shifting at 6,500 RPM. The Chevy 2 launched hard, the lightweight and high-revving engine creating a combination nobody had seen before. The car ran through the quarter mile in 13.1 seconds at 108 miles per hour, fast for B stock, but not earth-shattering. And for the second pass, Nicholson let the engine breathe. Shifting at 7,500 RPM, the little 283 screamed like a banshee. The The lightweight Nova rocketed down the track, the driver's door actually flexing open from the force of acceleration. The timing boards lit up, 12:40 seconds at 112 miles per hour. The crowd went silent. That was 409 territory, super stock territory. A guy in the lanes next to him was racing a 409 Impala that had just run 1260. He walked over, looked under Nicholson's hood, shook his head, and walked away without saying a word. N-word spread quickly through Iowa's drag racing community. There was a kid with a small block Chevy running big block times. At first, nobody believed it. Then they saw it with their own eyes. The little Chevy 2 would pull up to the line next to Impalas and Galaxies with twice the displacement and simply drive away from them. The psychological impact was devastating. These big block guys had spent thousands of dollars on their engines. They had bragging rights at every cruise night. Then some teenager with a junkyard motor was making them look foolish. Some accused Nicholson of cheating, claiming he had a hidden nitrous system or was lying about his displacement. Tech inspectors checked and rechecked. It was exactly what he claimed, a 287 cubic inch small block with fuel injection. What made Nicholson's build even more remarkable was its reliability. Big blocks running at the edge of their performance envelope often scattered connecting rods or cracked blocks. The massive forces generated by those huge pistons stressed everything. But Nicholson's high-revving small block just kept running. Pass after pass, weekend after weekend, the engine performed flawlessly. The fuel injection system, once properly sorted, proved more consistent than carburetors. Carbs were sensitive to weather changes, altitude, and humidity. The mechanical fuel injection delivered the same precise mixture every time. Nicholson could make pass after pass with identical times, something carburetor racers struggled to achieve. Other racers started paying attention to what the kid was doing. They watched him warm up the engine, noticed how he staged differently than big block racers, observed his shift points. Some tried to copy his approach, buying fuel injection units and bolting them onto their small blocks. Most failed miserably. They didn't understand that the fuel injection was just one part of a complete system. Zen and Nicholson's engine was a symphony of properly matched components. The cam, compression, headwork, and fuel injection all worked together. Change any one element, and the whole system fell apart. It was systems engineering before anyone in drag racing used that term. He understood that an engine was more than the sum of its parts. It was about making every component complement every other component. The local Chevrolet dealer heard about Nicholson's creation and invited him to bring the car by. The service manager, a former racer himself, put it on their chassis Dyno. Word got out, and soon the dealership was packed with curious gearheads. When the engine hit 7,000 RPM on the dyno, the sound was indescribable. A small block Chevrolet simply didn't sound like that in 1962. It was mechanical violence, controlled explosion, barely contained chaos. The dealer's lead mechanic, a guy who'd been working on Chevys for 20 years, just stood there shaking his head. He'd installed plenty of 409s, tuned hundreds of engines, but he'd never seen anything like this. A small block making big block power while revving like a motorcycle engine? It challenged everything he thought he knew about engines. Nunchne. That's when things got interesting. Word of Nicholson's achievement reached Detroit. Chevrolet engineers were skeptical at first. Some teenager in Iowa claimed to be making 350 horsepower from a 283? Impossible. The best Corvette engineers, with unlimited budgets and advanced equipment, had only extracted 315 horsepower from the same basic engine. Kenchten, but the time slips didn't lie. Track officials from multiple dragways confirmed the numbers. The car was running times that should have been impossible for its displacement. Either everyone was wrong about the limits of the 283, or this kid had discovered something significant. group of Chevrolet engineers made an unofficial trip to Iowa. They wanted to see this miracle motor for themselves. Nicholson, nervous about corporate attention but eager to show off his work, agreed to a demonstration. The engineers watched him fire up the engine, listened to the mechanical clatter of solid lifters, observed the instant throttle response that only fuel injection could provide. On the track, they watched in amazement as the little Chevy 2 demolished a 409 Impala in a heads-up race. The Impala got the jump off the line, its massive torque advantage obvious, but by 60 feet, Nicholson's Nova was pulling even. By the 8th mile, it was ahead. At the finish line, it was 2 car lengths in front. And the engineers examined the engine carefully. Everything was relatively stock, no exotic parts, no hidden modifications. Just careful assembly, intelligent component selection, and brilliant tuning. The head engineer, a man who'd worked on the Corvette fuel injection program, admitted he'd never considered using the system for drag racing. They'd designed it for smooth power delivery and good fuel economy, not maximum performance. And then what Nicholson had done was completely reimagine what the fuel injection system could be. He'd taken technology designed for one purpose and adapted it for something entirely different. It was hot rodding at its finest, seeing potential where manufacturers saw limitations. None. The implications were staggering. If a 17-year-old kid could extract this kind of performance from a small block, what were the real limits? The entire industry had been obsessed with displacement, believing that the only path to power was bigger engines. Nicholson had just proved that efficiency could trump displacement. And think about the physics for a moment. The 409 made its power by moving large volumes of air and fuel with each combustion event. But it was limited by its ability to breathe and its maximum RPM. The massive pistons and long stroke meant that valve float and mechanical stress limited it to 6,000 RPM. Beyond that, things started breaking. Engineer Nicholson's 283, with its short stroke and light reciprocating assembly, could safely spin to 7,500 RPM. That's 25% more combustion events per minute. The fuel injection eliminated breathing restrictions, allowing the engine to fill its cylinders completely, even at those extreme speeds. High compression extracted maximum energy from each combustion event. And it was a completely different philosophy. Instead of making each explosion bigger, make more explosions. Instead of brute force, use intelligence. It was efficiency over displacement, technology over tradition. And it worked. None the racing world took notice. Within months, other racers were experimenting with fuel injection on small blocks. The prices of used Rochester units skyrocketed as everyone wanted to copy Nicholson's success. But most failed because they didn't understand the complete package. They bolted fuel injection onto otherwise stock engines and wondered why they weren't making power. Nanda Nicholson started getting calls from other racers wanting to buy his engine or hire him to build them one. He built a few for select customers, but each one took weeks of careful work. This wasn't something you could mass produce. Every engine required individual attention, careful tuning, and extensive testing. And by 1963, Nicholson had become known as Dyno Donned for his methodical approach to engine development. While other racers guessed at combinations, he tested everything on the dyno. He kept detailed notes on every change, every adjustment. His notebook became legendary among racers who got to glimpse it, pages of measurements, calculations, and observations that revealed the secrets of making power. He started racing professionally, quickly moving up from local tracks to national events. His Chevy 2, updated with a fiberglass hood and racing slicks, became a giant killer. He'd pull into the staging lanes at national events, and veteran racers would shake their heads. Here comes that kid with the small block again. And the psychological warfare was brilliant. Big block racers would hear Nicholson's engine and assume it wasn't a threat. It didn't have the low-frequency rumble of a 409 or 427. It sounded angry but small. Then the Christmas tree would drop, and they'd watch their expensive big block get outrun by a motor half its size. Canon Chevrolet eventually took notice officially. They hired Nicholson as a consultant, wanting to understand how he'd extracted so much from their small block. His work influenced the development of the legendary L-84 fuel-injected 327, which made 375 horsepower and became one of the most sought-after Corvette engines ever built. But here's the really interesting part. Nicholson's approach predicted the future of performance engines by 2 decades. In the 1980s and 1990s, manufacturers finally embraced his philosophy. High-revving, small-displacement engines with advanced fuel delivery became the norm. Honda's VTEC, BMW's M engines, Ferrari's screaming V8s, they all followed the template Nicholson established in 1962 when today's engines make even more specific power. A modern Honda S2000 makes 240 horsepower from just 2.0 liters. That's 1.95 horsepower per cubic inch. But it does it using principles Nicholson discovered with hand tools and determination. High compression, excellent breathing, precise fuel delivery, and the ability to rev to the moon. Point Nost. The cost comparison is mind-blowing. Adjusted for inflation, Nicholson's $65 investment would be about $600 today. Try building anything that makes 350 horsepower for $600 in 2024. You couldn't buy a decent exhaust system for that money. Yet he created something that matched Chevrolet's most expensive offering. Asked what Nicholson really proved was that innovation doesn't require massive budgets or corporate resources. It requires understanding, creativity, and the willingness to challenge conventional thinking. He looked at the same parts everyone else had access to and saw something different. Where they saw limitations, he saw opportunity. And the 283 build also demonstrated the importance of system thinking in engineering. You couldn't just bolt on one go-fast part and expect miracles. Everything had to work together. The cam had to match the compression, which had to match the fuel delivery, which had to match the intended RPM range. Change one element without considering the others, and performance suffered. And this holistic approach was revolutionary in 1962. Most hot rodders followed recipes from magazines or copied what worked for their friends. Nicholson approached engine building like a scientist, changing one variable at a time and measuring the results. It seems obvious now, but it was groundbreaking then. The fuel injection revelation was particularly important. While everyone else was adding bigger carburetors, Nicholson recognized that fuel delivery precision mattered more than volume. A perfectly tuned fuel injection system could outperform multiple carburetors because it eliminated compromises. No more choosing between good idle quality and top-end power. The engine could have both, and in modern racing still uses these principles. Today's pro stock engines make over 1,500 horsepower from 500 cubic inches, 3 horsepower per cubic inch. They achieve this through exactly the techniques Nicholson pioneered: extreme RPM, perfect fuel delivery, and maximum efficiency from every component. The technology is more advanced, but the philosophy is identical. Now looking back, Don Nicholson's achievement represents everything great about American hot rodding. A teenager with no formal engineering education, working with salvage yard parts and hand tools, outsmarted General Motors' best engineers. He didn't do it through luck or accident. He did it through observation, experimentation, and relentless pursuit of efficiency. The story also highlights how established thinking can blind us to possibilities. Chevrolet's engineers were brilliant people, but they were trapped by conventional wisdom. Bigger must be better. Fuel injection was for smooth street driving, not racing. Small blocks were economy engines, not performance engines. It took an outsider, someone without those preconceptions, to see what was really possible. And then Nicholson went on to become a drag racing legend, winning multiple championships and setting numerous records. But that first 283 build remained special. In interviews decades later, he'd light up talking about it. The excitement of discovering something nobody else knew. The satisfaction of proving the experts wrong. The pure joy of making something extraordinary from almost nothing. And then that engine still exists, rebuilt several times but maintaining its essential character. It's in a private collection now, occasionally fired up for special events. When it runs, people still stop and stare. That sound, the mechanical fury of a small block spinning beyond what anyone thought possible, remains unlike anything else. The Chevy 2 that housed it was retired from racing in 1968, but Nicholson kept it. He'd occasionally take it to cruise nights, parking it next to modern muscle cars making twice the power. But old-timers would recognize it, remember watching it destroy big blocks at their local track. They'd tell their grandkids about the kid who figured out something GM's engineers missed. The legacy of that $65 engine extends far beyond drag racing. It proved that innovation doesn't require permission or resources or advanced degrees. It just requires seeing things differently and having the courage to try. Every time a grassroots racer challenges factory teams, every time a small tuning shop embarrasses a major manufacturer, they're following in Nicholson's footsteps. And in today's performance world, would be unrecognizable to someone from 1962. Direct injection, variable valve timing, turbocharging, and sophisticated engine management systems have pushed specific output to levels Nicholson could barely imagine. But the fundamental principle he proved remains unchanged. Efficiency beats displacement, intelligence beats brute force, and innovation can come from anywhere. What would Nicholson think of modern engines? He'd probably love the technology but miss the simplicity. His 283 was purely mechanical, every function controlled by springs, levers, and carefully shaped metal pieces. He could diagnose problems by sound, adjust performance by feel. Modern engines require computers and software, trading soul for capability. Ancient, but he'd surely appreciate how his philosophy won in the end. Nobody builds 500 cubic inch production engines anymore. Instead, we have 2.0-liter turbocharged 4 cylinders making 400 horsepower. We have naturally aspirated V8s that rev to 9,000 RPM. We have fuel injection systems that can adjust mixture 50 times per second. It's everything he envisioned, just with technology he couldn't have imagined. The real lesson of Don Nicholson's 283 isn't about engines at all. It's about questioning assumptions, challenging authority, and believing in your ideas even when everyone says you're wrong. It's about the power of individual innovation and the importance of thinking differently. A 17-year-old kid with $65 changed how we think about engines. What established truth are you going to challenge? And that little 283 didn't just beat the 409 on drag strips across Iowa. It beat conventional thinking, corporate engineering, and decades of accepted wisdom. It proved that sometimes the best solution isn't the biggest or most expensive or most obvious. Sometimes it's a different way of looking at the same problem everyone else is trying to solve. And that's the beauty of hot rodding, of engineering, of innovation itself. The next breakthrough isn't waiting in a corporate lab or university research center. It might be in a garage in Iowa, where someone is looking at ordinary parts and seeing extraordinary possibilities, where someone is asking Ashes, what if? Instead of accepting Archers, that's how it's always been done. Nicholson's story reminds us that expertise can become a prison, trapping us in conventional thinking. Sometimes it takes an outsider, someone who doesn't know what's impossible, to show us what's actually possible. That teenager with his junkyard 283 didn't know he couldn't match a 409's output, so he did it anyway. And what's your 283? What's the accepted wisdom in your field that nobody questions? What's the expensive solution that might have a $65 alternative? The next Don Nicholson is out there somewhere, probably in a garage, definitely questioning everything, and absolutely about to prove the experts wrong. Anyone can follow instructions and build what's already been proven. It takes vision to see what could be. It takes courage to try when everyone says you'll fail. And it takes genius to make it work with $65 when others are spending thousands. That's the story of Don Nicholson's impossible engine. Not just how a small block matched a big block, but how curiosity conquered convention, how efficiency embarrassed excess, and how a teenager from Iowa reminded Detroit that innovation doesn't require permission. What revolutionary idea are you working on? Drop a comment below, and let's discuss what's possible when we challenge conventional thinking. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of hot rodding's greatest David versus Goliath stories, make sure to subscribe. We're just getting started exploring the innovations that changed everything.